It's good to speak with you today, Mark. We're looking forward to hearing your views today on the food supply chain in the Middle East. Before we start, can you provide a brief background of yourself?
Well, I'm 55 years of age and a lifer in operations and supply chain. I've never really done anything else since leaving school at 16. My first role was in the purchasing department of a public authority in the UK. I then moved into stock control department before the company decided I should be an accountant, so they sent me to study at college, but I quickly realised this vocation was not for me. I had an opportunity to play guitar for a living, so I left the business before qualification and did this for a few months whilst I tried to figure out what to do next. I ended up taking a job back in supply chain when I met my first wife and managed to get a job in production planning and procurement. I think I was fortunate enough to be able to get a job at that point because being a musician hardly qualifies you for 9 to 5 working, in the opinion of many. Luckily for me, my new boss wanted to learn to play guitar, so I guess he was a kindred spirit, and I guess he also figured on cheap lessons. I spent 1985 working in the office equipment industry in a company who were an early adopter of MRP. After a year, another local company also in the same industry were hiring and looking to implement a DEC MRP2 system, and they needed people with experience to help them do it. I guess I sold myself well at the interview and had to learn quickly. I used to go to bed reading manuals and anything else I could get my hands on about MRP2 and operations planning. The business was a terrific grounding for me, and the DEX system was excellent, especially in terms of production planning, method study and production. I learnt a lot quickly. In whatever I've done since, the knowledge from this time has become a constant reference point for me. Irrespective of the system used, it could be Oracle or SAP, etc. They've all got their own foibles, but the basic logic is the same as then. Most people who have been around a while understand there is very little that is actually new. I've worked in supply chain in food, office equipment, FMCG, with many types of manufacturing within that, and healthcare. So I've pretty much run the gauntlet of many of the different disciplines within supply chain, certainly on the manufacturing and logistics side.
Can you talk about some of the challenges that you faced within the food supply chain in the Middle East?
Supply chain in the Middle East is evolving because the Middle East is changing rapidly. I first went there around 8 years ago as a supply chain and purchasing manager for a bakery business called Western Bakeries, who are owned by Almarai, who are the biggest vertically integrated dairy business in the world and the biggest food group in the MENA region. At that time, in 2009, supply chain was really in its infancy. It wasn't something that was well understood. I was very fortunate to be with a UK nationality operations manager who understood what was required and recruited me, and a CEO gave me the authority to go ahead and do it. I had previously worked as a supply chain director in the UK and as an internal supply chain and manufacturing consultant in a business that was split between manufacturing and repacking. But I had also worked for Manor Bakeries, the Mr Kipling and Cadbury leg of RHM Foods, so I was able to effectively bring quite a lot of experience to the table. The first thing that struck me was the quality of the staff in the Middle East. To be honest, people quality was fairly poor at that point in time, although it has changed now, and there was not many who had the basic skills or understanding of supply chain. The business itself had world-class equipment and systems, but not really sure how to optimise them. The first requirement was a matter of really educating the business management to understand the systems that they had bought and what they could do for the business. Only then would they be able to progress in learning how to use them and to enhance their operation and to start making a strong, stable operational supply platform for their business. Traditional regional supply chain back in 2009 was all about having high inventory to protect from stockouts, buying what was available, and when you ran out, you would just go and buy more. Gaps in supply chain were not popular but commonplace. There is a further issue in Saudi Arabia, where I was based, in that flour is provided from government flour mills. This is because the government understood the importance of bread to the kingdom and to its people, and provides the flour at a subsidised rate to sell at a reasonable price. This, however, gives you no choice in the supplier due to the cost of acquisition from elsewhere, and provides you with another set of problems, as the quality of the flour is inconsistent due to raw material availability. This in turn meant you needed good quality production managers or master bakers, if you could actually get them, to adjust the mixes on plant. The bills of material therefore could be wildly inaccurate versus reality, and the volume of expensive ingredients could be wildly understated, as the tendency was always to do the cost roll up at the minimum cost with little waste in the bill. Because of the poor skill sets and understanding inherent at the time, implementations of systems were rarely done well, and there will be huge anomalies in the BOMs. When you compound that with implementations that were, shall we say, done quickly in a bid to prove the quality of consultancy by showing speed, then you generate a cornucopia of problems. So we had a scenario where we had a variable mix against a production standard from a badly written inaccurate BOM. If you couple that with a desire to keep anything other than production direct operatives to a minimum, basically because you've got no desire to bring in what was known as computer users, not being totally cognizant of the situation but understanding the need for speed, the implementation consultant will roll out extensive backflushing, leading to inaccurate inventories that are never corrected until the annual stock count. As only the standard is issued from one location that have a single warehouse, remember, speed is of the essence. With this scenario, you end up with flawed purchasing plans wherever they existed. After a while sorting out these issues within bakery division, I was promoted to run the whole of the operational supply chain for the bakery, dairy and juice division of Almarai, which at the time was around 5 times the size of bakery and had a similar set of problems that needed to be corrected. This takes time because you've got to go through the loops again of education of why it's important to have default consumption locations at the lines themselves and why aggregate numbers put through on a weekly basis for consumption are inadequate. There is a good understanding of spreadsheets by people, and these are often overused to the point where the mainframe systems are used as typewriters. This reality is often a hard sell, especially when the company believes they are doing really well after their systems development, but a few presentations later on, reality and support is usually forthcoming from executive level, who are always keen to see results improve. A lot of work therefore had to be done to reduce some of these internal issues. Over time, knowledge was built and investment made in technical, NPD, people and systems development to cope and eliminate the problems. No company is an island, that is especially true in the region, as you then have to face external issues of supply chain. The Middle East, I think it's fair to say, has been slow to develop a customer service ethic. Other factors are important, like pricing, which can be very keenly negotiated, but margin is everything. In times of prosperity, you do not have to be amazingly good to make money. I do not believe that even now many companies are heavily enough into supply chain to understand its potential positive impact on cost of sales. Supply chain in the region is governed by overstocking at all levels still. This is because heavy inventories are still held to guard against poor service from suppliers. It may not necessarily be the supplier you're directly dealing with, but perhaps the supplier that provides to them. As you drift further down the food supply chain, it's less sophisticated, and the risk therefore greater of stockouts with a ripple effect taking place. This is not limited just to raw materials. If you take, for instance, packaging, many companies do not measure vendor performance. Pricing is still seen as the key metric. The cost of non-delivery is therefore mitigated by holding high stocks in order to guard against supply issues. I think it's fair to say that inventories in Europe are significantly lower and stock turns will continue to be higher than in the Middle East whilst the supply chain revolution develops there. For me, it's all about building that service ethic. I chaired the Kingdom Supply Chain Conference last year, and one of the questions I put to the floor was, how many of you actually measure the service from your suppliers or your own customer service? Of nearly 100 delegates, less than 4 claimed they did, and 2 of them did it by sending out customer satisfaction surveys. I would say for sure that's the biggest challenge, the fact that customer service as a concept is still in its infancy, and people invariably make up for that by holding on to stocks and see it as a prerequisite to doing business. I do not see that changing in the short term, unless the market leaders take so much of the market that forces change within the competitive set.
How is the inbound supply chain in the Middle East changing today? And what are some of the changes that are taking place?
I think the Middle East companies tend to fall these days into 2 distinct groups of companies. Those that really work hard at customer service and those that don't and are happy to put up with the noise and the cost that comes from having a weak supply chain. Over the last year or so, with the oil price dropping, there is much more of a tendency to want to be in the former and not the latter. I was lucky enough to work for one of the early adopters of this service culture in Almarai. I can attest to the fact that they are absolutely customer orientated. That's why the company has grown to the level it has, because they really believe in achieving the magical 99% plus into their sales division in terms of customer service. There used to be every Sunday morning a general managers meeting with the CEO to present the service from the previous week. Yeah, people even had to work through the weekends to get the numbers. And there was a grand inquisition if the number fell below the magical 99% target. The companies that have actually taken service on board are the companies that have really prospered in the Middle East. They really have become much more profitable because they deliver and they do what they say they're going to do. Unfortunately, some companies have not followed suit yet and are content with competing for second place. Only when this changes will supply chain thrive. One of the interesting things in the Middle East is the fact that the same suppliers will have different service ethics for different customers. This is not always based on profitability, but usually actually based on volume. This is because either overhead recovery is important or more likely based on the commission levels of the account managers doing the selling. The typical GCC customer is demanding of respect and of service, especially at the customer front end. There is not the percentage market share yet that Europe has with national accounts for grocery. Bacalas, which are like local shops, are still the mainstay of people's shopping. However, market share in national accounts is growing strongly every year as people look to more of a one-stop shop solution and are offered huge shopping malls driven by people like Al Shire, the retail group from Kuwait, providing European and USA brands, and plenty of, and most importantly in the region, plenty of out-of-home dining opportunities, which is really important to the regional shopper there. As this trend continues and the buying power of the national accounts like Panda, Otain, Carrefour, etc. increase, they will look to gain a more competitive pricing structure and take cost out. This in turn will put even more pressure on the suppliers that sell to them and apply pressure on their suppliers to reduce costs other than the region's typical price down system of negotiation, which is well understood and easily digestible by all. I think this will be a big enabler for the growth of supply chain as people look to reduce waste and cost to serve in response to the demands of the growing national account. The people challenges out there are interesting. There is a huge push on the employment of nationals, and rightly so. The oil-driven economy the government recognises is in decline, and there are active plans to generate new investment through the whole of the GCC. I believe because supply chain is still a relatively new profession, the demand for GCC supply chain professionals is higher than supply. Companies either have a choice to bring expatriate managers in or put local people in the jobs who in some cases are not yet ready due to the supply chain as we know it has not been in existence that long, and the level of adoption is very mixed and varied. The problem supply chain has with many of the business leaders is they do not yet fully understand the concept of supply chain efficiency and perhaps more so capability and its direct relationship to cost. They still believe supply chain is about purchasing, price downs and running a warehouse. Local hires will get there for sure in terms of the ability needed. I've recently met some really strong gifted nationals from the GCC, but demand for them outstrips supply. Ultimately, I think this is one of the biggest issues facing the region in terms of progress. People moving into the region as supply chain leaders need to understand they are only guests in the region and have an obligation to train the next generation of local leaders. There is a big issue at the moment in the region in that there is not an awful lot of third-party logistics and transport companies that have actually operated at the very highest levels. Actually, there's not that many third-party logistics people out there. There's certainly opportunity for that. Some of the big companies out there actually still run their own supply chain, and I have to say do it very well. I would also say that quality logistics in the Middle East is a very difficult thing to achieve, and here's why. The areas of population are dense and widespread, which means heavy investment, lots of miles on the clock, and time. It is a huge issue for the Middle East, particularly in products which are vulnerable to shelf life issues. You have areas that are going to drop down to a minimum of only about 16 degrees, and other parts of the region you're going to freezing in the winter. You've got completely different requirements from one side to the other. The same with high humidity in places like Dubai and Jeddah, so there's an issue with product sweating and mold growth. Conversely, there's a different set of challenges in the other regions where it's very dry, and at times can be like having a hairdryer blowing in your face. So there are different challenges for the logistics operations out in the Middle East than elsewhere, and this makes third party less attractive than most. In summary, the region for supply chain opportunity is thriving and will continue to do so for a good while. Yeah, the landscape is changing and the pace of it may not be in line with some other areas, but those that do this well and embrace the service culture excellence are achieving great growth and great profits. The others, I'm afraid, are just going to have to catch up.